On the wedding day, my fiancé died in a car accident. I went to the funeral home to claim his body, only to be informed by the police that the man I had been in a relationship with for 3 years was not my fiancé. He was a stranger named William. At the same time, my estranged father, who was on the run, made headlines in the news. A major drug lord in the city, Drug Raven, was caught and shot dead during the escort process. Among the officers involved in the capture operation, William's name was prominent. The reason my father risked coming out was to attend my wedding with him. Helen, someone wants to interrogate you. 3 days after my father's death, I was brought to the police station for questioning under the pretext of assisting in the investigation. Now I was in the interrogation room, facing a man in uniform with a straight posture across the table. Just a week ago, he was my fiancé. At that time, he wasn't called William yet. He was the second in command of my father's organization, the most trusted person by my father. Trusted to the extent that my father handed me over to him personally, entrusting him to take care of me for the rest of my life. His deep eyes stared at me across the interrogation table. Your father built such a large drug trafficking organization, and you knew nothing about it. I just kept looking at him. After a long while, I smiled faintly. If I tell you that I never touched those things and didn't know what my father was up to, would you believe me? He looked at me for a long time, sighed, and stood up. Helen, the more you say, the better it is for you. I stood up immediately, but was quickly pushed back into my seat by someone. I looked up at him. You promised to take care of me for a lifetime, do you remember? He didn't reply, turned around, and left the interrogation room. A day later, my lawyer, Eric, bailed me out on the grounds of insufficient evidence to detain me. This lawyer must have been a backup plan left by my father when he was alive. Eric, a reputable man free from nationality constraints, had been managing my father's business abroad for years. At this moment, his handsome face showed some concern. But he continued in a businesslike tone. I have arranged a passport for you to leave the country. If everything goes smoothly, you can leave tonight. I looked up at him. Where can I go? The area outside is under surveillance, and the police won't let the daughter of a big drug lord leave the country. Eric glanced at me. You haven't been involved in your father's business or social circle, you haven't violated any local laws, there's no need for you to bear any responsibility. No need to bear responsibility. It sounds easy. My father did so many bad things. The money he earned from drug trafficking was used to educate me. As his daughter, no one believes that I am clean. I stared blankly at the sofa, only to blurt out after a long while, I want to see William. Are you out of your mind? He's a police officer now, not your fiancé. Eric's voice was cold as he looked at me. I want to see him. I repeated stubbornly. I want to find out whether all the time he spent with me was just to complete a mission, or perhaps there was a bit of sincerity. Eric smirked. Are you still not giving up? He personally killed your father. Giving up? I gave up on the wedding day. What's left now is just unwillingness. As for my drug lord father, he sent me abroad to study when I was 12. Over the years, I've never seen him, and he never fulfilled his duties as a father. Until a year ago, he pretended to be seriously ill, hoping I would return home to see him. He deserved to die for all the bad things he did. But he is my father. And it was he who pushed me towards William. I remember the first time I met William. It was at the airport when I returned to the country, arranged by my father to pick me up. He was wearing a white shirt and casual suit pants, with neatly groomed hair. I thought he was a recent college graduate. When I asked if he was my father's secretary, he just smiled and said, It's okay even if you think I'm a secretary, please get in the car. I looked at the electric car he drove up in, with my mouth twitching a couple of times. My father was rich, but extremely stingy with me. These years abroad, I was almost always in a state of working and studying. I didn't expect a Maserati to pick me up, but an electric delivery car seemed a bit too much. Seeing my skeptical expression, he said, You've just returned to the country and might not be familiar with the local transportation. If you want to see your father soon, this electric car is the best choice. He glanced at the luggage next to me. Someone will come to get your stuff. Are you ready to go now? I'm ready. I got on the back seat and took the opportunity to hold onto his waist, even pinching his flesh sneakily. But his waist muscles were so well trained that I couldn't even pinch them. I felt his body slightly stiffen. I smirked triumphantly. You might not know, I've just returned from overseas, and some habits haven't changed. The wind whizzing around us rustled through his hair. I heard him chuckle softly. A little girl who doesn't know any better. Men are always the ones taking advantage. He suddenly accelerated the electric car. This time it was me who got a bit stiff, realizing my closeness was a bit too tight. As my thoughts returned, Eric had already left the hotel where I stayed. Before leaving, he tentatively asked if my father had left any other instructions for me. I shook my head and said no. He nodded, had the hotel staff bring me lunch, and told me to rest well before leaving naturally. My father's properties and companies had gradually been sealed these days. He started fleeing a month ago after receiving wind of it. He didn't even say a word to his own daughter. He just transferred 10 million to my account. And now all of it has been frozen. It can be said that I haven't received a penny of the fortune my father earned over the years. But knowing his cunning nature, this is just a front to make it seem like he's cutting me off. I can tell, and obviously the police can tell too. Now everyone is waiting to see what moves the daughter of this big drug lord will make next. Eric paid for a week's worth of hotel expenses for me and then left. Soon, the hotel staff pushed a lunch cart up with lunch. I glanced at it, no appetite whatsoever. I just stared at the drink next to the lunch, lost in thought for a while. I uncovered the cup and poured out the liquid inside, finding a monitor at the bottom. I stared at the monitor, emotionlessly put it back. I started calling William's former cell phone number. Either it was busy or it connected, but no one answered. It seems like he really intends to cut ties with me. I took a deep breath. I played my trump card. If you want to know about my father's connections from before, come find me at room 5032 at hotel. After sending the message, I simply turned off my phone. Whether William wants to acknowledge me or not, upon receiving this message, he will come. But I hadn't expected that not only would I be waiting for William, but also for someone else. At 7 o'clock in the evening, the doorbell rang right on time. I looked out through the peephole. It had been blocked with gum. So I leaned close to the door and quickly retreated to the bathroom. It wasn't William. He had no reason to do this. Who was it then? My father's enemies, or his former drug trafficking accomplices? I quickly found my phone, but suddenly didn't know who to call. 911. They would surely respond quickly, but I had just come out of that world. I didn't want to go back in. I grabbed the hotel's electric kettle and hid behind the door. Soon enough, the hotel room door was pushed open with a click. I lifted the kettle and smashed it towards the person who entered. However, the person deftly dodged and then grabbed my wrist. Helen! What are you doing? A familiar voice brought me back to my senses. The person entering the room was William. He had changed out of his police uniform, wearing casual clothes, a grey loose-fitting shirt, with a white t-shirt underneath. I used to like it a lot when he wore shirts. When we were dating, I bought him many different colored shirts. And grey was my favorite color. I stared at him, my eyes slightly red. You finally decided to show up. Looking so handsome, are you here to coax me? William's mouth twitched slightly. I didn't invite you. What, you still want to assault law enforcement officers? He glanced at the electric kettle in my hand and swiftly took it from me. I asked him why he blocked the peephole with gum. Next second, he suddenly tensed up warily. He looked at the gum on the peephole and immediately asked, "Did anyone visit before me?" "No one, you just arrived." Before I knew it, he grabbed my hand and quickly pushed me into the bathroom, shutting the door. He turned on the tap and poured water over my head, using his body to shield my head. The next second, a deafening explosion sounded around us. The hotel room door was blown off in an instant. Because we had hidden in the bathroom early, if we had been even a second late, both William and I would have probably been blown to pieces. I was dumbfounded. My ears were ringing, unable to hear any sound. After what seemed like minutes, my ears finally returned to normal, and I looked at him in astonishment. William roughly pulled me out. He looked at the debris on the floor, then turned to me and asked if I was hurt. I looked down and saw a cut on my arm from the explosion, but it didn't seem serious. I didn't feel any pain. He glanced at it, smirked slightly, then tore the bedsheet and wrapped it around the wound, finishing with a bow. I looked at the bow and after a while said, "You finally learned how to tie a bow." I had taught him before, as he used to just knot it haphazardly. Once on Valentine's Day, I asked him to prepare a gift in advance. Until Valentine's Day was almost over, he gasped at the doorway of the movie theater, handing me a crumpled navy blue box with a clumsy knot on it. It took me a while to unwrap it. Inside was a toy crystal, the kind only young girls would like. I couldn't help but complain, didn't he know how to tie a bow when giving a gift to a girl? A hint of embarrassment appeared on his handsome face. I've never given a gift to a girl before. I didn't know there were such details. While I was still reminiscing about what had happened before, William had already begun examining the scene. With handsome furrowed brows, he muttered, "The gum wrapper on the peephole contained a tiny bomb. The dosage wasn't large, but sufficient to kill you." Hearing this, tears welled up in my eyes. The next moment, I jumped into his arms. "I knew you wouldn't let me die here." William sighed and pulled me away, keeping some distance. "Helen, I am not your fiancé now. Our past was all a lie. I was an undercover agent. My only mission was to bring down your father's drug trafficking ring. I have now restored my true identity as a police officer. Saving you was just my duty as a cop." He then reached into his ear and took out something. He showed it to me. It was a tiny earpiece. "It's malfunctioning now." Clearly, he had installed a listening device before coming here. At this moment, it was clear that he came to me without any sentiment, only for work. "I must tell you seriously, you know something, you better tell us now. You saw it just now, someone wanted to kill you. If I hadn't shown up in time, you would have been a charred corpse by now." I remained silent, my lips pressed tightly together. Seemingly unable to get through to me, he said kindly, "As far as I know, this new type of gum bomb was only possessed by your father's previous trade partner. If you confess now, I can request police protection for your safety. I can save you once, but it doesn't mean I can save you every time. You've been targeted. Trust the police, it's your only way out." I smiled faintly, my clothes were already soaked. The wounds on my arms started to bleed incessantly, soaking my entire outfit with blood. I held my arm, feeling somewhat overwhelmed, hugging my head. "I have never been involved in my father's business. You should know that better than me, considering we were together for over 3 years, right? I met with you just to find out one answer. Have you spent all these years completing tasks, including marrying me?" He looked at me, his voice hoarse as he said, "I am an undercover agent, a police officer, a drug enforcement officer." Tears streamed down my face as I looked at him. "So, you killed my father. He treated you so well, so trustingly. He handed the whole company to you, even me, and this is how you repaid him." He stared at me for a long time without saying a word. He took out a recording pen from his pocket, turned off the button on it, and threw it aside. Looking at me, he asked back, "In your eyes, what kind of person was your father? If you don't know, then let me tell you. Your father discovered my identity a month before he went on the run. But do you know how I cleared my suspicion?" He exhaled heavily, chuckled, and then took off his shirt. There were scars of various sizes on his sturdy arms, most of which had overgrown, leaving many grotesque scars. But these weren't the main focus. There was a scabbed wound on his arm with a deep pit, a gruesome scar. I stared at him in astonishment. This wound was carved alive on the night before our engagement. Do you remember? That day was the day you went to choose a wedding dress, and it was also the day my other undercover comrade sacrificed himself to protect my identity. Do you know what he went through before he died? He looked at my clear face, showing a hint of a smile. He reached out and grabbed my cheeks harshly, with a cruel sense of hatred in his eyes. I still remember what he went through. That day, I had arranged to go to the bridal shop with him early. But that day, he said he had something to do and couldn't come. I sat alone in the bridal shop, trying on my favorite wedding dresses over and over again. I kept asking the shop assistant to take photos and send them to him. He never replied until 2 in the morning. He just sent a smiling emoticon. He disappeared for a whole week, and when he reappeared, he showed me the same smile. Every feature of his face was forced into a smile, faintly tinged with hatred. Just like now. He slowly began, my comrade, he was tied up all over, covered with fresh meat, and faced with 5 ferocious dogs. These dogs were raised on meat, and had been starved for 7 days. I remember that day, he was covered in blood, and I sat next to him, curled up, watching him being torn apart by those vicious dogs. Do you know what I was thinking at that time? I was thinking that while you were enjoying the service at the bridal shop, envisioning a happy married life. My comrade, aged 36, had been undercover for 6 years. His daughter was only 6. But from the birth of his child to the moment of his death, he never dared to hold her, nor could he see her grow up, or see her wear a wedding dress. My cheeks were sore from his grip, tears uncontrollably falling one by one. My mouth could only sob. Realizing he overreacted, he released his grip. My body fell weakly to the ground. Helen, so many brave police officers sacrificed themselves to combat drug trafficking, and your father, breaking the law, causing the deaths of so many people. Even now, you won't confess. I turned pale, feeling flustered and grasping at anything. William grabbed my hand and slipped something into it, staring at me intently with red-rimmed eyes. He whispered softly in my ear, "You've been targeted. I am giving you this one chance. I won't bother you again in the future. So, tell me everything you know." "I'm sorry, it's my father," I said, holding onto the object in my hand, about to speak. Just then, the sirens of police cars and ambulances pierced the air, with medical personnel rushing over with a stretcher. At the same time, my lawyer Eric appeared. He hurried over, helping me up from the ground. Coldly looking at William, he said in a businesslike manner, "This is not a police station. Officer Fang should not have the authority to interrogate my client here. If possible, I request to take her to the hospital for treatment immediately." Eric shielded me in his arms, holding my injured arm with one hand, and whispered quickly in my ear, "Don't say anything. Don't ask anything. Leave everything to me. The police will question you as usual later. You don't have to worry, you are a victim now." I was confused as I was pushed into the ambulance. Eric swiftly closed the ambulance door behind him. Looking out through the window, I saw William standing on the roadside, covered in blood, but seemingly indifferent. I lowered my head, tightly clutching a small recording pen stained with blood in my hand. I gently covered my face with my hand and hid the recording pen in the inner layer of my bra. Eric took me to the hospital for treatment. The bomb fragment had grazed my blood vessel, causing continuous bleeding. It looked scary, but due to timely hemostasis, my body did not suffer any fatal injuries. After the wound was bandaged, I would be discharged in a couple of days. I lay in a single-person ward, while Eric was playing with his phone nearby, answering a few calls in between. When he returned and saw me staring blankly, the repetition of William's words playing in my mind, Eric covered me with a blanket, seeming to understand something. "I have investigated the bombing incident. You should listen to me and obediently go abroad. The longer you stay in the country, the more danger you are in," Eric said. I moved my eyes. "Who planted the bomb?" Eric stared at me. The surveillance cameras in the corridor were damaged in advance, but someone saw William entering the control room early and coincidentally knocking on the door of your hotel room. So, you mean this explosion was all orchestrated by William? What was the purpose? Eric furrowed his handsome eyebrows and loosened his tie. I guess the purpose was to extract information about your father from you. Before your father's drug trafficking group was destroyed, he hoarded a large amount of goods, along with the location of the drug hiding place and a list of some drug manufacturing personnel. After your father was killed, this lead was lost. The police want to find this list, and you are the most likely person to know where the list is, Eric said, to which I shook my head in confusion. He sighed lightly and patted my hand. I know you are innocent, but the implications of this are too great. Even though I believe you, the police don't, and the wanted drug dealers do not either. Even if they can't find the list, they will kill you first, because only the dead can ensure nothing goes wrong, he explained. I grabbed his arm in panic. What do I need to do? Try hard to recall where your father might have hidden the goods. Find it and hand it over to me. I will give it to the police for you. You don't need to show up. I will take care of everything for you, Eric assured me, holding my hand with a sincere gaze. William is an undercover agent, a police officer. He will not marry you, he is only pretending. The only person you can trust now is me, he added. I forced a smile, feeling self-deprecating. If I help you find the list, will you guarantee my safety? I asked. Of course, he replied. Okay, I will try, I said. Eric finally smiled in satisfaction. The police will come to question you later, rest assured, you are a victim, they won't detain you for this. But they will definitely assign someone to you. Don't worry, I will handle it all. After Eric left the ward, I gradually put away the look of panic and slowly raised my arm with the foredrip. From the inner layer of my bra's neckline, I took out a small recording pen, which William had slipped into my hand before Eric arrived. I pressed the button, hearing Eric's voice from within. Was William giving me this recording pen a chance? I pressed the button, thoughts drifting away. In fact, I didn't believe a single word Eric said. He had installed listening devices in the room, knew I had called William before. The bomb conveniently exploded just before William entered the room. He knew I wouldn't trust the police or believe William. He calculated that in my panic, I could only trust him. A drug dealer's lonely daughter, monitored by the police, betrayed by her lover. In Eric's eyes, I was simply too easy to control. But he missed one thing. I was indeed the daughter of a drug dealer, but I was not a fool. The police did come to question me about the bombing, but as a victim, I held on to the fact that I didn't know who did it. The surveillance cameras in the hotel corridor had been destroyed beforehand. With no leads, the police were powerless, only informing me that law enforcement officers would protect my safety in the near future, trying to make me trust them. I nodded without saying much. Eric really thought I was a fool. He said the bomb was made by William. As a law enforcement officer, where did he get the bomb from? Not to mention whether he could get it or not, the police would not allow him to do such dangerous things. He even put on a show of being in distress. But I also confirmed one thing. My father had a list, and this list is something only I know where it is hidden. Eric acted quickly. By the time William rushed to the hospital, I had already been taken away. All of my father's properties were sealed, including the house. I had to stay in Eric's private residence. He arranged 2 bodyguards to protect me 24 hours a day. In name, it was for protection. But in reality, it was just surveillance. I still ate my meals, daydreamed, played on my phone, and watched news reports related to my father. Then I went out to the nearby park to watch the old men fishing. I didn't like fishing, but William used to surprisingly enjoy it. I had been in a relationship with him for 3 years. I knew what he liked and didn't like. He used to say that only when he was fishing, his heart could be calm, not thinking about his social status, free from any pressure. He only enjoyed the brief joy when a fish got caught. I didn't understand it then. But I probably do now. It turns out the fish he was waiting for was my father. And I was the bait. Now that the fish has been caught, the bait naturally no longer exists. The old man fishing saw me watching with attention, and kindly handed me the fishing rod. "Little girl, you've been watching for quite a while, do you also like fishing? Do you want to try?" I took it. Without hesitation, I grabbed some breadcrumbs and cast them into the lake, then lowered the fishing line. The old man frowned as he watched. "You can't catch anything without bait." I smiled friendly at the old man. "The fish I'm catching doesn't need bait, because I am the bait." The old man's expression changed slightly as he looked at me. I handed back the fishing rod to him. Just as I was about to leave, I whispered in his ear, "Block 502 in Windchime Courtyard, Old City, act quickly and prepare fresh goods. My life is in your hands." The old man continued fishing as if he hadn't heard me. I stood up, tossed my phone into the park's trash can, and left the park. I hailed a taxi on the roadside, reporting an address. I changed 2 taxis and 3 buses along the way. Finally, I managed to shake off the surveillance. I wasn't sure if it was from the police or from Eric. But all of these were no longer important. The taxi finally stopped in front of an old building. I walked straight to the unit and stopped on the 3rd floor, where in the old electrical box I found a key. I opened the dusty door, looking at the narrow and old 2-bedroom apartment. Despite no one living there for over a decade, there was surprisingly no dust inside. It was clear that someone was cleaning it regularly. I suddenly laughed. When I was 10, all 3 of us lived here. My mom was still alive then. She was beautiful and stylish. Even though she worked in a factory, she dressed up nicely every day. My dad was just a small-time street thug, always smoking and drinking, didn't know how to get along with my mom. Maybe women just liked bad men. My dad hardly worked, and my mom supported the whole family on her own. Even so, he was not satisfied. When drunk, he would beat my mom, saying she dressed up nicely just to seduce men. He also said the money my mom brought in was dirty, yet every time he sobered up, he would rummage through everything to find the hidden money. Then he would take it out to spend freely with his hooligan friends. Over the years, anyone would be driven crazy. I remember the day when I graduated from primary school. I ran home with my certificate. But what I saw after opening the door was my dad lying on the bed, inhaling and exhaling smoke. A foul smell wafted from the house. And my mom was lying on the floor, already cold. There was a bottle of pesticide next to her. My mom was dead beside my dad. But my dad was lying on another bed nearby, snoring loudly. It dawned on me what had happened. I grabbed a fruit knife from the kitchen, standing shakily by the bedside. I clutched the knife tightly. I wanted to kill this scum. But for a full 2 hours, I just couldn't do it. When my dad woke up, he showed no remorse, cursed once, and started packing up to run away. Before leaving, he gave me $100, telling me to hide for a while too. I was only 12 that year, and that 100 supported me for 3 months. He left me a mess and vanished. 3 months later, hungry, I begged on the streets. But my runaway father found me. He had transformed, dressed neatly and stylishly, his hair styled with gel. He said he would take care of me well and then sent me to a foreign country where I was a stranger. Who would have thought, 10 years later, he still left me with a mess before leaving again. I looked at everything in the house with a sneer. Probably out of guilt, he bought this old house after making it big. He bought it under a distant cousin's name. That's why the police didn't seal it off. The house remained the same inside, even with a photo of the 3 of us. I almost didn't need to guess. I picked up the photo of the 3 of us, smashed the glass, and found a white paper behind the photo. I stared at the list on the paper and squeezed it tightly. This is what they wanted, right? At that moment, the once tightly closed door was suddenly kicked open by a group of thugs. Before I could react, they surrounded me. The leader, with a fierce look, stared at me with a pitch-black gun in his hand. "You're the daughter of Poison Crow." The boss was right after all. The sly old fox actually hid the list in such a ghostly place, making it hard for us to find. I clutched the list tightly to my chest. What do you want to do? What? Of course, take the list and send you to meet your drug lord father, Scarface sneered. I turned around to run, but the next second he grabbed my collar and gave me a hard slap, knocking me to the ground. The metallic, rusty taste of blood filled my mouth. Scarface chuckled and directed the others, search, see if there are any other copies, clean it up. I was tied to a chair with a knot that wouldn't budge. The thugs didn't find anything else, but they were certain that the list in my hand was what they wanted. So before leaving, they set the sofa on fire, patted my face, and laughed, you lucked out, Poison Crow's daughter, dying in a fire. Who knows if it'll make the news tomorrow. The fire was getting bigger. The group of people locked the door. The acrid smoke made me cough. But I laughed. These people were really stupid, clearly armed. Yet they insisted on using the dumbest method to tie me up here, trying to burn me alive. Shoot me dead once, then there would be no worries. I have to admit, sometimes being a woman does have its advantages. Like, it makes people look down on me. I counted silently, and as expected, after 10 seconds. The door was pushed open again, and I was rescued. A middle-aged man with regular features looked at me apologetically. If you looked closely, you would find that this man bore some resemblance to the old man fishing in the park. Sorry for being late. Not late, just in time. How's the arrangement for the goods you prepared? It's all set. The body was just delivered to the funeral home, less than 2 hours after death. Very good. I left the old apartment building just as the fire was about to burn down the beams. As soon as I left the compound, I heard a deafening explosion. Seeing this, I smirked slightly. I wonder if he'll like the first gift I prepared for him. The next day, the local authorities reported an explosion in an old residential building in the city. Thankfully, the building was already scheduled for demolition, and most residents had moved out. Only a charred body was found at the scene of the accident. I scrolled through the news on my phone, having a slice of toast for breakfast. As I ate, I said, it looks like the police already know it wasn't me who died. The person beside me replied, the police have your DNA data in their database. It's easy to identify you with a comparison. Why go to such lengths knowing you'll be exposed? I smiled. Of course, it's to make others believe that the daughter of Poison Crow is dead. Whom did those people look for with the list? As expected, it was Eric's men. I sneered. Just as I suspected. Pretending to protect me, set me up, as long as I handed over the list. He would ensure my safety. If I believed him, wouldn't that be truly laughable? He claimed to be a lawyer, yet he knew so much about my father's drug network, even the hierarchy. I dare say, after all those years undercover, not even William knew as much as this lawyer Eric. After my father's death, the massive stash of goods piled up, if sold, amounted to an unimaginable figure. Eric wanted to swallow my father's network, becoming the new drug lord. I deliberately acted weak, arranged to meet William, pretending to have a schoolgirl crush. To make him underestimate me. He rigged the hotel room with a bomb, only to intimidate me. Wanting me to willingly help him find my father's list. But the list he got now was one I had prepared in advance. I looked at the middle-aged man beside me. Uncle, after Eric confirms the list, he might not show up for the exchange in 3 days. Could you release news of me being alive now? Uncle nodded. He was one of my father's men, but he never showed his face or got involved in drug deals. He was my father's special cleanup person. You could say he was my father's hidden trump card. And now, he was probably the only person I could truly trust. The taciturn uncle asked in confusion, why announce that you're alive? I replied calmly, Eric is cautious. So, I need to make a move that will make him suspicious. A resurrected dead person is bound to raise doubts, whether real or fake, he'll come out to confirm. Do you really want to do this? It's too dangerous. Since your current identity is dead, you can easily walk away. The money your father left is enough for you to live comfortably. The next moment, I crushed the piece of toast in my hand. Uncle, do you know why my father, who had been on the run for a month, suddenly got caught? Wasn't it to attend your wedding? Though he hasn't cared for you over the years, he still has some fatherly feelings for you. I chuckled, shaking my head, pressing the toast crumbs onto the table. You're wrong. This maniacal drug dealer, responsible for countless deaths, how could he possibly have fatherly feelings for me? It was because, the day before my wedding, I had someone tell him that his deal failed because I handed the evidence to the police. He said he wanted to kill me himself, send me to meet my dead mother. Then the next day, I gave his location to the police, but he resisted, tried to flee, dying too easily. Uncle looked at me in surprise, eventually smiling bitterly. You two really are alike. I smiled indifferently. Uncle, please do one last thing for me. The exchange was set for the North Bay Pier. That's why I deliberately scheduled it there. It's by the sea, with plenty of fishing boats and private yachts nearby. Many drug traffickers like to do business there. The day after I had Uncle release the news, a courier box was delivered to our house. He thought it was a bomb, but I had him open it in front of me. Inside was a bloody arm. I almost threw up at the sight, but instantly thought of something, my body tense, clutching Uncle tightly. Look at the arm, is there a scar that's been cut off? Look. Uncle checked the bloody arm. Shaking his head, he said, no scar, nothing, but there's a note. As I heard this, my clenched heart finally started beating again. Dear Helen, I miss you as if seeing you, looking forward to tonight's pier exchange, hoping to meet again. Worried you won't come, so I've prepared a small gift. This arm isn't William's, but if you don't come tomorrow night, his will be next. I let out a sigh of relief. Laughing coldly. I underestimated Eric, that old fox. At 9:10 that night, I arrived at the North Bay Pier as agreed. Eric stood on a large fishing boat. Several containers were stacked on the boat to obscure the view. Seeing Eric, I was suddenly filled with fear, staring at him and asked, I'm here, where did you keep William? Is he hurt? The tall figure of Eric stood on the edge of the fishing boat, the light pulling his figure slightly askew. Upon hearing my words, he turned around and slowly approached me. In the dim light, he carefully examined my face. Then he reached out, pinching my chin. His voice cold, Helen, stop pretending. Do you think I'll still believe your disguise? We're on the same side, no need for pretense. I looked at him and slowly put away the fake crying face. Can't fool you, huh? Aren't you pretending too? What lawyer? You are just my father's supplier, he has been supplying you for years. He sneered and leaned closer to me. Really worthy of being the daughter of the Black Crow, you figured it out. You want to make one last trade, take the money, and then get out of it. I sighed, but you still caught me, didn't you? He snorted coldly, not saying a word. My eyes flickered. Where is William? He raised his chin, and soon I saw behind the stacked containers, a figure of a person hanging. At this moment, he was covered with blood, looking like he had been tortured. I clenched my fingers, took a long time to adjust my breathing. Turning to Eric, I said, let's make a deal. Tonight's goods are all yours, I don't want any. Eric lit a cigarette, and leaned against the nearby container, sneering. It was supposed to be mine anyway. What are you thinking? Helen, did you think I called you here to negotiate terms with you? The next second, a cold gun muzzle was pressed against the back of my head. I narrowed my eyes slightly, and my body suddenly relaxed. I know, I don't have the right to negotiate with you, but are you sure that the list you have is genuine? You should have investigated this in the past few days. That list of personnel, I planted half of the false information. Eric looked at me, his eyes shifting to the person behind me. The gun muzzle moved away instantly. Let's work together, I don't want to die. I just want to take what's rightfully mine. You know, my unlucky old man didn't leave me a penny. Why should I believe you? Because of the list I have. I took out a small USB flash drive. Of course, there are backups, as long as I die, my men will send these USB drives to the police. Eric stared at me silently, then suddenly burst into laughter. He probably doesn't laugh often, so the smile was stiff and exaggerated. That's not enough, Helen. You have to prove to me that you killed him before I believe you really want to cooperate with me. I staggered slightly. Eric's men threw the almost lifeless William in front of me. I immediately crouched down to check his injuries. I found only some minor external wounds, but the methods used by these drug dealers to torture people. But that's not all. He didn't know what he had been tortured into. At this moment, he still had consciousness, struggling to look into my eyes. Weakly, he spoke, "Helen, don't make more mistakes." I lowered my eyes, but Eric took the gun handed over by his men and placed it in my hand. I didn't take it. I just looked at him with a bitter smile. After all, he was someone I once loved dearly. I couldn't bear to do it, so help me. He's already in this state, tie him up, push him into the sea, he won't survive. Eric looked at me with a sardonic smile. Not sure what he was thinking, he unexpectedly agreed. Ropes were brought, and I personally tied them. In front of Eric, I looped the nylon rope around William's body, coil after coil. Finally, I tied a knot at the junction. Just like the first gift William gave me. After doing all this, I sat weakly on the deck. Eric clicked his tongue. He mocked, saying that I loved this man to death, even came to me to save him. But the way I tied him up was more professional, and it was a dead knot. I thought you wanted to push him into the sea to let him escape. It seems you want him dead. I wiped away my tears, stood up, coldly said, he has heard our conversation. If we let him live, we will both die. In the face of life and death, what is love? Eric pondered my words, laughing heartily. Ush him into the sea and feed the sharks. Wait. I spoke up to stop him. What are you up to now? My time is limited. After all, he is the person I loved the most. I want to say one last thing to him. All right, last words before death, quite romantic. William had been brought to the edge of the deck, and when he saw me coming, Eric's men tactfully stepped aside. I reached out and held his injured body in my arms. Quietly, I whispered in his ear, "William, I'm sorry. Actually, I really liked the Valentine's Day gift you gave me back then. But now there's no chance. Fortunately, let me give you a gift as well. This seems to be the first time I officially give you a gift. It's a first-class honor, I hope you like it." Saying this, I stuffed the recorder he had given me into his hand. It contained everything I knew, including every transaction between my father and Eric over the years. The recorder was waterproofed, so even if it fell into the sea, it wouldn't matter. He weakly opened his eyes in surprise and confusion as he looked at me. The next moment, I let go of his hand and pushed him directly into the depths of the sea. Impressed by my swift action, Eric smiled satisfactorily. The subsequent drug transaction went smoothly. After my father was arrested, his previous underlings hoarded a large amount of goods that had not been distributed. Now someone was willing to take over, claiming to be the daughter of Black Crow. With the heat off, they were eager to act. Attracting many drug dealers with stockpiled goods, almost all the drug dealers in the city had gathered here. Until a loud police siren sounded. Soon, the entire dock was surrounded. The drug dealers panicked, clamoring about who had leaked the information. I lean against the railing on one side and quietly light a cigarette myself. No surprise at all. Eric immediately senses something is wrong and rushes towards me with a gun in hand. "Did you tip off the police?" I look at him with a faint smile. "No, I just did what I had to do." Eric is enraged, and he quickly gathers his men who swiftly open the containers on the deck of the ship. Inside are several barrels of gasoline. I watch this scene closely. It seems he also planned to use my method, faking death to escape. The number of these gasoline barrels is enough to blow up the entire fishing boat. What a waste. "Eric, it's too late now." As I say this, I flick away the cigarette, but at the same time, explosions erupt from nearby fishing boats. In Eric's shocked eyes, I quickly lunge towards him, holding him tightly. with a look of crazed delight on my face. Another one sent off worth it. Hasn't anyone told you not to mess with women? The bomb you gave me at the hotel last time, I returned it to you intact. How does it feel, madman, madman, you're all madmen. Eric's face contorts in fury, but he can't break free, and can only scream frantically. Soon, the fishing boat we're on also erupts in a massive explosion. In the midst of the raging flames, I seem to see myself begging on the street at the age of 12. And I see the boy in the white shirt riding an electric bike waving at me. It's always women who suffer losses. I shut my eyes. William, this is the first gift I've given you. Are you happy? And the comrade you said you sacrificed. I'm really sorry for what my dad did to him. But at the same time, I envy that little girl. Because she has such a great father who loves her. If only I had one too. 6 months later, a major drug trafficking network in a certain city was completely destroyed based on data lists provided by insiders and locations where drugs were stockpiled. The drug manufacturers and dealers were all captured. At the commendation ceremony organized by the police, William looks down at the medal on his chest. Feeling somewhat conflicted inside. 6 months ago on the deck of the pier, a girl said she would give him a first-class commendation. Now he has received that first-class commendation. But what he wants to tell her is that it wasn't her who gave it to him. It was him and numerous anti-drug police officers who dedicated half their lives, even their lives, to obtain it. But he can no longer correct her. And that knot she tied, really hard to untie. He wonders who taught her that. William smiles and knows there's no answer. He likes tying knots, because it was a special technique taught during police training school meant to confuse enemies. It looks like a dead knot, but is actually a live knot. With skill, it can be undone. It could save a life when necessary, and the day Helen tied him to the deck, she used the exact same knot on herself. So she had already guessed his identity when she gave him his first gift. William takes a deep breath. Looks at the badge on his cap. Slowly puts it on and then salutes.